They said she was the weakest link in the pack. They said an Omega without a scent was better off dead. But on the coldest night in Montana's history, while the strong alphas were hiding by their fireplaces, Ivy Vance was doing the impossible. She dragged 15 massive, dying wolves out of a blizzard that was burying the world in white. She thought she was saving strangers. She thought she was just doing the right thing. She didn't know that the massive black wolf watching her with golden eyes wasn't just a beast. He was the king of the entire continent, and she had just saved the one life that could burn the world down for her. The thermometer on the porch of the rusted cabin read 40 below zero. But Ivy Vance didn't need a gauge to tell her that breathing felt like inhaling broken glass. This was the dead zone, a stretch of unclaimed territory on the edge of the Silver Creek Packlands. It was where the unwanted went to disappear. And Ivy, a 23-year-old Omega who had been banished for the crime of being scentless, unable to help the pack breed or track, was definitely unwanted. The wind howled, rattling the tin roof of her small shack. It was the worst storm to hit the Pacific Northwest in a decade. The weatherman on the crackling AM radio had called it a historical freeze. Ivy pulled her scarf tighter, her boots crunching through 3 feet of fresh powder. She shouldn't be out here. She should be inside, huddled next to her wood stove. But she had heard something. Even for a scentless Omega, her hearing was sharp. It was a whine, not the wind, a living sound. She pushed through the tree line near the old logging road, her legs burning from the effort. When she reached the ravine, she froze. At first, she thought they were boulders, huge, dark shapes scattered across the snow, half buried in the drifts. But boulders didn't bleed. She scrambled down the embankment, sliding on the ice. "Hey!" she screamed, her voice snatched away by the wind. "Can you hear me?" She reached the first shape. It was a wolf, a shifter in their primal form. But this wasn't a normal wolf. This creature was massive, the size of a small bear, its fur matted with ice and something darker, blood. Ivy fell to her knees, pulling her gloves off to feel for a pulse at the wolf's neck. It was faint, sluggish. She looked around, panic rising in her throat. There wasn't just one. There were 15 of them. 15 massive wolves, scattered like toys thrown by a tantruming child. "Wake up," she hissed, shaking the grey wolf. "You have to shift back. You'll freeze in this form. Shift." Shifters had high body heat, but no biology could withstand 40 below when injured and unconscious. If they stayed here another hour, they would be statues. The wolf didn't move. Ivy stood up, looking back at her cabin. It was 300 yards away, uphill. "I can't carry you," she whispered, tears freezing on her lashes. "I'm just an Omega." She looked at the wolf closest to the center of the carnage. He was distinct from the others. He was midnight black, larger than any alpha she had ever seen in the Silver Creek pack. Even in the snow, he looked terrifying. She crawled over to him. His breathing was shallow. He wasn't just cold, he smelled of wolfsbane. They had been drugged. This was an ambush. Ivy looked at his face. He looked regal, even in death. "I'm not letting you die," she gritted out. She didn't have strength, but she had leverage. Ivy ran back to the logging road where she had parked her old ATV. It wouldn't start in this cold, but she had a plastic hauling sled hitched to the back of it for firewood. She unhitched the sled and dragged it down the ravine. The next 4 hours were a blur of agony. Ivy Vance, the girl her father had called a waste of rations, became a machine. She rolled the heavy, limp bodies onto the sled, one by one. She wrapped the rope around her waist, digging her boots into the ice, and hauled them up the slope. Her muscles screamed. Her lungs burned. She vomited once from pure exertion, wiping her mouth with a numb hand and continuing. One by one. Drag, pull, scream, collapse, repeat. She dragged them into her living room. She shoved her meager furniture, a thrift store sofa, a wobbly coffee table, into the kitchen to make room. She laid them out on the floor, on rugs, on blankets, on her own mattress, which she dragged from the bedroom. By the time she got to the 15th wolf, the massive black one, she couldn't feel her legs. She fell beside him in the snow. "Come on," she sobbed, grabbing his thick fur. "You're the last one. Don't be heavy. Please don't be heavy." He was the heaviest of them all. It took everything she had. She screamed a primal sound, pulling until the rope cut through her coat and into her skin. She dragged him over the threshold of the cabin and kicked the door shut against the howling wind. She collapsed on the floorboards, her chest heaving, surrounded by 15 wet, dying monsters. The cabin was small. The heat from the wood stove was fighting a losing battle against the drafty walls. It wasn't warm enough. Ivy forced herself up. She grabbed every towel, every coat, every piece of clothing she owned. She began to dry them. Wet fur meant death. She started with the black wolf. As she ran the towel over his flank, she felt a strange spark, like static electricity, but warmer. His eyes snapped open. They were gold. Pure, molten gold. He tried to snarl, to bite her, but his head fell back, too weak to lift. "It's okay," Ivy whispered, her hands trembling as she wiped the blood from his muzzle. "I've got you. You're safe." The black wolf watched her. He didn't blink. He watched her move to the next wolf, and the next, tending to his pack with a tenderness that contradicted the harshness of the world outside. Ivy didn't know that the wolf watching her was Roman Sterling. She didn't know that 3 hours ago he had been traveling to a summit to decide the fate of the Western Territories. She didn't know his convoy had been hit by an experimental neurotoxin dart, and she certainly didn't know that by touching him, she had just initiated a bond that had been dormant for 500 years. She just stoked the fire, oblivious to the fact that she had just locked herself in a room with the most dangerous predators on the continent. For 2 days, the blizzard buried the cabin. The snow piled up past the windows, turning the interior into a dim, amber-lit cave. Ivy didn't sleep. She couldn't. 15 wolves took up every inch of her floor space. The smell was overpowering. Wet dog, copper blood, and the distinct ozone scent of powerful magic. She had used her entire winter supply of venison jerky to make a broth. She knelt beside each wolf, using a turkey baster to force the warm, protein-rich liquid down their throats. The black wolf, Roman, was the first to regain some motor function. Ivy was in the kitchen, boiling snow for water, when she felt eyes on her. She turned. The black wolf was sitting up. His head brushed the drying herbs hanging from her low ceiling. He took up half the living room. Ivy froze, the ladle dripping water onto the floor. "You're up." The wolf didn't shift. He couldn't. The toxin was still in his system, locking his biology in this form. But his intelligence was there. Ivy could feel it pressing against her mind. He let out a low chuff. It wasn't a growl, it was a question. "I'm Ivy," she said, keeping her voice steady. "You're in my cabin, near Silver Creek. I found you in the ravine." The wolf looked at the others, his pack. He did a head count. When he realized all 14 of his guards were present and breathing, his shoulders relaxed slightly. He looked back at her. He nudged an empty bowl with his nose. "Hungry?" Ivy asked. She scraped the bottom of the pot. She poured the last of the stew into a metal mixing bowl and set it down before him. She didn't have any food left for herself. She had eaten half a granola bar yesterday. The wolf sniffed the bowl, then looked at her. He sniffed the air near her. He could smell her hunger. He whined and nudged the bowl toward her. Ivy smiled, a tired, broken thing. "I'm okay. You need it to heal. You're big. You burn calories faster," he growled, a low, vibrating rumble that shook the floorboards. He refused to eat. "Stubborn," she muttered. She took a spoon and ate a single mouthful of the broth. "See? I ate. Now you." Satisfied, the wolf decimated the food in seconds. Suddenly, a loud banging on the front door shattered the quiet. The wolves who were conscious tensed. The black wolf's hackles rose, a ridge of dark fur standing straight up. A low, lethal growl built in his chest. "Open up, Vance! We know you're in there!" Ivy's blood ran cold. She knew that voice. It was Gavin Blackwood, the beta of the local Silver Creek pack, the man who had enjoyed tormenting her before. She was banished. "Stay down," Ivy whispered to the wolves, her heart hammering against her ribs. "Please stay down." She grabbed a heavy iron poker from the fireplace and moved to the door. She cracked it open, leaving the safety chain on. Gavin stood there, flanked by two other enforcers. They were bundled in expensive parkas, looking well-fed and arrogant. "What do you want, Gavin?" Ivy asked. "We're doing a perimeter check," Gavin sneered, his eyes raking over her disheveled appearance. "Reports of a rogue pack moving through the area. Dangerous animals. We have orders to shoot on sight." Ivy gripped the doorframe. "I haven't seen anyone." Gavin sniffed the air. "I smell wet dog, Ivy. You got a stray in there." "I live in the woods," Ivy lied smoothly. "My roof leaks. Everything smells like wet dog." Gavin chuckled. "Let us in. We'll check for you. Might even warm you up, darling." He reached for the door handle. "No," Ivy said firmly. "This is private property. Even the Alpha acknowledged my right to solitude when I was exiled. You have no jurisdiction in the dead zone." Gavin's face darkened. "You think a piece of paper protects you? You're a scentless nobody, Ivy. If I want to come in, I come in." He kicked the door. The wood splintered around the chain. Ivy screamed, stumbling back. Gavin laughed, preparing to kick it again. Suddenly, a sound erupted from inside the cabin that stopped Gavin cold. It wasn't just a growl. It was a roar. A sound so deep and authoritative, it triggered the biological submission instinct in every wolf within a mile. Gavin froze, his eyes widening. "What the hell is in there?" Ivy turned. The black wolf was standing right behind her. He filled the doorway. His lips were pulled back, revealing teeth the size of daggers. His golden eyes were fixed on Gavin, with a promise of absolute, agonizing death. Gavin, a dominant beta, turned pale. He took a step back, almost tripping over his own snowshoes. He didn't know who this wolf was, but his wolf spirit knew. His wolf spirit was currently whimpering and rolling over in his head. I, Gavin stammered. The black wolf barked, a sharp, commanding sound that said, "Leave." "We're leaving," Gavin said, his voice cracking. "Just checking." He turned and fled, his enforcers scrambling after him, terrified by a threat they couldn't even name. Ivy slammed the door and locked it, leaning her back against the wood. She slid down to the floor, shaking. She looked up at the black wolf. He was looming over her, but the aggression was gone. He lowered his massive head and nudged her cheek with his cold, wet nose. He licked away a tear that had escaped her eye. "Thank you," she whispered. She didn't notice that the wolf was staring at the bruise on her wrist, an old injury from her former pack. His eyes narrowed. Roman Sterling was healing fast, and once he shifted back, he was going to have a very long, very violent talk with the man named Gavin. But first, He had to figure out why this tiny, malnourished woman smelled like nothing, until he touched her. When he touched her, she smelled like home. The silence that fell over the cabin on the third morning was louder than the blizzard's howl. The wind had finally died, leaving the world outside, buried in 5 feet of undulating white drifts. Inside, the temperature had risen above freezing for the first time. Ivy had made a desperate choice during the night. With the woodpile empty, she had taken a hatchet to her kitchen table and chairs. It was her only furniture besides the bed, but dead wolves needed no chairs, and neither did frozen girls. The warmth, combined with Ivy's relentless administration of broth and water, seemed to be the catalyst they needed. The neurotoxin was metabolizing. It started with the grey wolf nearest the stove. Ivy was kneeling beside him, checking the dressing on a nasty gash on his flank, when his entire body seized. A guttural sound, half whimper, half scream, tore from his throat. Ivy jumped back, dropping the roll of bandages. "Hey, are you okay?" Then the sounds began. The sickening wet crunch of bone snapping and realigning, the tearing sound of ligaments stretching. It was a horrifying, visceral process, far more violent than the smooth transitions she had seen the Silver Creek Alphas perform for show. This was primal pain. Fur retracted into skin. Snouts shortened into human faces, contorted in agony. Paws elongated into hands, clutching at the worn floorboards. Within 10 minutes, Ivy Vance was no longer sheltering 15 wolves. She was trapped in a 400-square-foot cabin with 15 naked, shivering, incredibly muscular men. Panic, cold and sharp, pierced through her exhaustion. She was an omega. In the hierarchy of packs, she was prey, and she was currently surrounded by top-tier predators in a confined space. She scrambled backward into the kitchenette area, grabbing a carving knife from the counter. She held it in front of her with shaking hands. "Stay back," she warned, her voice thin. The men were groggy, disoriented. They groaned, clutching their heads, trying to sit up. They were massive, all of them built like linebackers, their bodies scarred with symbols of battles Ivy couldn't imagine. Then, the black wolf moved. He had waited until his pack was safe. He rose from the mattress Ivy had sacrificed, his golden eyes locking onto hers across the chaotic room. His shift was different. It was silent, controlled, an exercise in pure power. When he stood up on 2 legs, Ivy had to crane her neck to look at him. He was easily 6'5", a towering wall of muscle and dark intensity. Even naked, shivering slightly from the after effects of the poison, he commanded the room. He didn't look like a man who had just been near death. He looked like a weapon that had just been unsheathed. The other 14 men instinctively shifted, turning their bodies toward him, lowering their heads in deference, even as they sat on the floor. The dark-haired man looked around the cabin, his gaze taking in the poverty, the peeling paint, the missing furniture now burning in the stove, the empty shelves. Finally, his eyes landed on the knife in her hand. He took a step toward her. Ivy squeezed her eyes shut and thrust the knife forward blindly. "Don't come closer." A large, warm hand gently wrapped around her wrist. He didn't squeeze, he just stopped her movement. The same electric jolt she had felt when drying his fur zinged up her arm, nearly making her knees buckle. "If I wanted to hurt you, little wolf," his voice was a deep, tectonic rumble that seemed to vibrate right through her chest bones, "that butter knife wouldn't stop me." Ivy opened her eyes. He was inches away. Up close, his golden eyes were mesmerizing, framed by thick lashes. He smelled of pine, cold air, and something intoxicatingly masculine, a scent so potent it made her scentless nose tingle. He gently pried the knife from her fingers and set it on the counter behind her. "My men need clothes," he said, his tone shifting from intimate to commanding in a heartbeat. "What do you have?" Ivy blinked, trying to process the sudden shift in dynamic. "I don't have men's clothes, just my own." He looked down at himself, then at her tiny frame. A ghost of a smirk touched his lips. "That won't work." "Wait," Ivy mumbled, her brain slowly firing back up. She went to a plastic bin shoved under the sink. "My ex. He left some stuff here years ago when he kicked me out of the main house." She pulled out a musty pile of clothing, oversized flannel shirts, ripped jeans, old band t-shirts. The man nodded. He took the pile from her. Their fingers brushed again, and this time he didn't pull away immediately. He stared at her for a beat too long, his nostrils flaring slightly as if trying to catch a scent that wasn't there. "It will have to do," he murmured. He turned to his men, tossing garments to them. "Cover up, assess injuries. Status report in 5. Ivy watched, stunned, as 15 deadly warriors dressed themselves in the cast-off rags of a low-level Silver Creek beta. It was absurd. It was terrifying. And the tallest one, the one with the golden eyes, put on a faded Metallica t-shirt that stretched tight across his broad chest. He turned back to her, and the intensity of his regard made her want to crawl under the sink. "Now," he said, leaning against the counter, trapping her in the kitchen corner without actually touching her. "Tell me who you are, and why a wolf with no scent is living in the dead zone." The cabin was bursting at the seams. The air was thick with the smell of 15 large men and the underlying tension of a military unit coming back online after a disaster. Ivy felt incredibly small. She stood near the stove, her arms wrapped around herself, watching them. They moved with an efficient synchronization that spoke of years of training together. A man with a shaved head and a nasty scar running through his eyebrow, the grey wolf she had tended to first, approached the dark-haired leader. He was wearing a pair of jeans 3 inches too short for him. "Toxin is clearing, sir," the scarred man said, his voice gravelly. "Elias and Marco are still unsteady, but functional. We estimated we were down for 48 hours. The leader nodded sharply. The ambush was coordinated, neurotoxin darts followed by a blitz attack. They meant to freeze us out. "They nearly succeeded," the scarred man said grimly. He turned his head, his predatory gaze landing heavily on Ivy. If not for the girl. Suddenly, 14 pairs of intense, alpha-grade eyes were staring at Ivy. She shrank back against the wall. She was used to being looked at with disgust, with pity, or with predatory amusement by men like Gavin. She wasn't used to being looked at with awe. "She dragged us," one of the younger men muttered, shaking his head in disbelief. "All of us. Uphill. In the storm." "Impossible," another whispered. "She's tiny, and she's an Omega." The leader silenced them with a sharp lift of his hand. He stepped away from the counter and approached Ivy. The cabin suddenly felt very small again. "You saved my pack," he said. It wasn't a question. It was a declaration of fact, delivered with the weight of a judicial sentence. I couldn't leave you there," Ivy whispered, looking at her boots. "No one deserves to die like that." He placed a finger under her chin and tilted her face up. She was forced to look into those molten gold eyes. "You have done a service to the crown that cannot be repaid with mere thanks," he said. Ivy frowned, confused. "The crown?" The scarred man stepped forward. "Show some respect, girl. You are speaking to Roman Sterling, the Alpha King of the Western Consortium, and the sovereign ruler of all shifter kind on this continent." The world seemed to tilt on its axis. The blood rushed out of Ivy's head, leaving her dizzy, Roman Sterling, the king. Every shifter knew the name. He was a legend, a ruthless tactician who had united the warring territories through sheer force and political brilliance. He was said to be the strongest wolf born in 500 years, and she had dragged him on a plastic sled and fed him broth with a turkey baster. Ivy's knees gave out. She would have hit the floor if Roman hadn't caught her. His arm hooked around her waist, pulling her effortlessly against his solid chest. "Easy," Roman commanded, glaring over her head at the scarred man. "Your tongue is too loose, Jax. You frightened her." "Apologies, my king," Jax muttered, bowing his head. Roman looked down at Ivy, who was trembling uncontrollably in his arms. He realized with a jolt of unfamiliar anger just how terrified she was. Not just of the situation, but of him. "I'm not going to hurt you, Ivy," he said, using her name for the first time. It sounded like a prayer on his lips. He guided her over to the mattress on the floor and sat her down. He knelt in front of her, bringing himself down to her eye level, a gesture of submission that made his men shift uncomfortably. "Look at me," he commanded gently. She did. Her eyes were wide, hazel, and filled with a lifetime of trauma. "You are under my protection now," Roman vowed, his voice low and fierce. "No one will ever harm you again. Not the cold, not hunger, and certainly not that pathetic excuse for a beta who tried to break down your door." Ivy swallowed hard. "Gavin. Gavin." Roman tested the name like it was poison on his tongue. "He is of the Silver Creek pack?" Ivy nodded numbly. "They banished me 3 years ago, because I can't scent. They said I was useless, a drain on resources." Roman's jaw tightened so hard, a muscle feathered in his cheek. He looked around the squalid cabin again. The drafty walls, the lack of food, the furniture she had burned to keep his men warm. He saw the sacrifice. He saw the incredible, stubborn strength in this tiny, broken woman who the world had thrown away. A profound feeling swelled in his chest, something hotter and heavier than gratitude. It felt terrifyingly like possession. "They were wrong," Roman growled, his golden eyes burning into hers. "You are not useless, Ivy Vance. You are the most valuable thing I have ever found." He took her rough, chapped hand in his massive ones. "Ask me for anything. Name your price for the lives of 15 Alpha warriors. Riches? Territory? Vengeance against those who exiled you? It is yours." Ivy looked at him. This warrior king kneeling on her dirty floorboards in a faded Metallica t-shirt. She didn't want riches. She didn't want territory. The idea of vengeance was too exhausting. A single tear leaked out and tracked through the soot on her cheek. Her voice broke. "I just don't want to be cold anymore. And I'm really hungry." The admission was so simple, so stark in its desperate honesty, that it silenced the room. Roman felt something fracture inside his chest. A king offered her the world, and she begged for warmth and a meal. His grip on her hand tightened. "Done," he swore. He stood up, his presence filling the room with a lethal, crackling energy that made even his seasoned royal guards flinch. "Jax, get the satellite phone from the sled baggage. Call in the extraction team. Tell them to bring blankets, medical supplies, and enough food to feed an army." He turned toward the door, his eyes shifting toward the direction of the Silver Creek packlands. The gold in his irises seemed to darken into molten copper. "And tell them to prepare the jet," the Alpha King commanded, his voice ice-cold. "We are taking Ivy home. But first, I have a boundary dispute to settle with the Silver Creek Alpha." The convoy that rolled into the Silver Creek settlement an hour later was a terrifying sight. It wasn't a military parade. It was a funeral procession for the living. The extraction team had arrived via helicopter, dropping off 3 armored, blacked-out SUVs. Roman Sterling sat in the back of the lead vehicle, Ivy Vance beside him. She was no longer wearing rags. The extraction team had brought emergency supplies, including a thermal tactical suit that fit her small frame loosely. She looked like a soldier lost in a coat, but Roman held her hand with a grip that suggested she was the most precious cargo on Earth. "You don't have to do this," Ivy whispered, looking out the tinted window as the familiar, manicured lawns of the Silver Creek pack house came into view. "We can just leave. They won't care." "They will care," Roman said, his voice devoid of any warmth. "Because I am going to make them care." The SUVs smashed through the wooden security gate of the compound without slowing down. Splinters of expensive cedar flew into the air. Sirens began to wail. By the time the convoy screeched to a halt in front of the grand plantation-style mansion, 50 Silver Creek enforcers had surrounded the vehicles, weapons drawn. "Step out of the vehicle!" a captain screamed, leveling an assault rifle at the lead SUV. "On your knees!" The door opened. It wasn't Ivy who stepped out. It was Jax, the scarred Royal Guard, fully dressed in black tactical gear now, looking like the god of war. He didn't raise his hands. He simply stepped aside. Roman Sterling emerged. The air pressure in. The courtyard seemed to drop. The Alpha King aura was not a myth. It was a physical weight. It slammed into the Silver Creek wolves like a tidal wave. The enforcers closest to the car dropped their weapons, their knees hitting the asphalt instinctively. It wasn't a choice. Their biology forced them to submit to the apex. "The king!" The whisper rippled through the ranks like wildfire. "It's the king!" The front doors of the mansion burst open. Alpha Richard Vance, Ivy's father and the leader of Silver Creek, strode out, looking furious, followed closely by Gavin and his mother, the pack matriarch. "What is the meaning of this intrusion?" Richard bellowed. He was a large man, accustomed to being the biggest wolf in the pond. He hadn't realized yet that the ocean had just arrived. Then he saw Roman. Richard's face went from red to chalk white in a heartbeat. "Your Majesty," Richard choked out, hastily bowing. "We didn't know. We had no notification of a royal inspection." Roman ignored him. He turned back to the car and extended a hand. "Come, Ivy." When Ivy Vance stepped out of the king's car, a silence fell over the courtyard that was absolute. Richard stared. Gavin's jaw dropped. The pack members who had spent years mocking her, tripping her in the cafeteria, and spitting on her shadow, stared in disbelief. "Ivy!" Richard sputtered. "What are you doing? Get away from His Majesty, you filthy—" "Another word," Roman spoke softly, but his voice carried to the back of the crowd. "And I will rip your throat out right here on your own front lawn, Richard." Richard froze. "Majesty, she is an exile, a scentless omega. She is a defect." "This defect," Roman said, walking Ivy up the steps until they stood toe-to-toe with her father, "single-handedly saved the lives of the crown and his royal guard. While you sat by your fire drinking scotch, she dragged 15 men out of a blizzard." Roman turned to the crowd, his voice booming. "This pack is rot. You banish your own blood because of a genetic quirk? You leave a young woman to freeze in the dead zone?" He turned his golden gaze on Gavin. The beta was trying to hide behind a pillar. "You," Roman pointed. "Step forward." Gavin trembled, his legs shaking as he walked down the stairs. "My king, I didn't know." "You kicked in her door," Roman said calmly. "You threatened to assault her. You called her a nobody." Roman moved faster than the eye could follow. One moment he was standing by Ivy. The next, his hand was wrapped around Gavin's throat, lifting the 200-pound man off the ground like a rag doll. "You are stripped of your rank," Roman announced, tightening his grip until Gavin turned purple. "You are stripped of your name. You are hereby exiled to the northern waste. If you are found within 1,000 miles of civilization, you will be hunted for sport." He dropped Gavin, who fell to the ground, gasping and retching. Roman turned back to Alpha Richard. "And you. You are unfit to lead. A father who abandons his child cannot protect a territory." "You can't do this," Richard cried, panic setting in. "We have rights. The council." "I am the council," Roman roared, his eyes flashing fully gold. "Your lands are seized. Your assets are frozen. Silver Creek is now under royal administration until a suitable alpha can be appointed." He looked at Ivy. "Is there anything you wish to say to them, Ivy? Anything at all?" Ivy looked at her father. She saw a small, terrified man who cared more about status than his own daughter. The anger she thought she would feel wasn't there. There was only pity. "No," Ivy said quietly. "I have nothing to say to them. They're strangers to me." Roman nodded. He wrapped his arm around her shoulders, shielding her from their gaze. "Then let us go home." As they walked back to the SUV, leaving the ruin of the Silver Creek hierarchy behind them, Ivy looked up at him. "You took their land," she whispered. "I took their pride," Roman corrected. "The land is just dirt. The pride was what hurt you." He opened the door for her, but as Ivy climbed in, she caught a glimpse of something in the distance. A figure in a red hooded cloak, standing at the edge of the forest, watching the scene unfold. The figure raised a camera with a telephoto lens, snapped a picture, and vanished into the trees. Ivy shivered. The blizzard was over, but she suddenly felt a very different kind of chill. The flight to the royal capital took 3 hours. Ivy spent most of it staring at the interior of the Gulfstream jet. The leather was softer than any bed she had ever slept in. There were bowls of exotic fruit, platters of smoked salmon, and champagne that sparkled like diamonds. She didn't touch any of it. She ate a ham sandwich the flight attendant brought her, eating it slowly, savoring every crumb. Roman sat across from her, working on a laptop. He had changed into a crisp white button-down shirt and dress slacks, the transformation from wild wolf to sophisticated monarch complete. Yet, every few minutes, his eyes would flick to her, checking on her, making sure she hadn't disappeared. "You're staring," Ivy mumbled, wiping crumbs from her lip. "I'm memorizing," Roman replied simply. "Memorizing what? I'm a mess. My hair is a bird's nest." "You are alive," Roman said, closing his laptop. "That is the only aesthetic I care about right now." When they landed, the sun was setting over the Obsidian City. It was a metropolis of black glass and steel built into the side of a massive mountain range. It was beautiful and intimidating. A limousine whisked them through the city to the palace, a fortress that looked like it had been carved out of the mountain itself. "This is where you live?" Ivy asked, craning her neck to see the spires. "This is where I work," Roman corrected. "I live in the East Wing. And now, so do you." The car stopped. Footmen opened the doors. But as they walked up the grand staircase, the doors didn't open for a quiet entry. They were thrown wide. A woman stood in the grand foyer. She was stunning. Tall, with cascading blonde hair, ice-blue eyes, and a gown that cost more than Ivy's entire life earnings. She smelled of expensive perfume and old money. This was Lady Elena, the daughter of the Southern Duke, and the woman the tabloids called the future queen. "Roman!" Elena cried, rushing forward. She threw her arms around his neck, ignoring the grime on his coat that he hadn't fully cleaned off. "Oh, thank the goddess! We heard reports of an ambush. I've been sick with worry." Roman stiffened. He gently but firmly peeled her arms off him. "I am fine, Elena. The guard handled it." Elena stepped back, her eyes scanning him for injuries. Then her gaze slid past him, and landed on Ivy. The look wasn't hostile at first. It was dismissive, like one looks at a piece of furniture that is out of place. "And who is this?" Elena asked, a polite frozen smile plastered on her face. "Did you bring a new maid from the provinces? She looks famished. I'll have the kitchen staff find her some leftovers." Ivy shrank back. This was the world she knew, the world where she was invisible. "She is not a maid," Roman's voice was hard. "This is Ivy Vance. She is the reason I am alive to stand in this hallway." Elena's eyebrows shot up. "Oh? The little thing saved you? How quaint. We must give her a reward. A check, perhaps?" "She's staying in the royal suite," Roman announced. The silence in the foyer was deafening. The royal suite was reserved for the queen, or the king's mate. Elena's smile faltered. "Roman, surely you joke. The guest wing is perfectly adequate. The royal suite is intimate." "She stays where I can see her," Roman growled, the wolf surfacing in his tone. "Her security clearance is level 1. Higher than yours, Elena. Higher than the Duke's." Elena's face hardened. The mask slipped for a fraction of a second, revealing a viper underneath. "I see. Well, welcome to the Obsidian Palace, Miss Vance. Do try not to break anything." Roman ushered Ivy past her, toward the elevators. As the doors closed, leaving Eleanor standing alone in the foyer, Ivy let out a breath she didn't know she was holding. "She hates me," Ivy said. "She fears you," Roman corrected. He looked tired. "Elena has spent 5 years trying to campaign for the position of my queen. She sees anyone breathing near me as a threat." "Are you with her?" Ivy asked, her heart doing a strange flutter. Roman looked at her, his eyes intense. "I am with no one. I have been waiting." "Waiting for what?" "For someone who sees the wolf, not the crown," he whispered. The elevator opened into a penthouse suite that spanned the entire top floor. It was breathtaking, but before Ivy could admire the view, Jax, the head of the guard, burst out of the security room. "Sir," Jax said, his face pale, "we have a problem." "Can it wait, Jax? I need to get Ivy settled." "No, sir. It's the toxicology report from the darts." Roman's demeanor shifted instantly. "Speak." Jax glanced at Ivy, then back to the king. "The neurotoxin used in the ambush. It wasn't manufactured by the rogue wolves. The chemical signature is unique." "Unique to who?" "It's from the royal apothecary, sir," Jax said grimly. "Specifically, a batch that was signed out 2 days ago." Roman went still. "Signed out by whom?" Jax swallowed hard. "By your personal physician, Dr. Oris." "Aris has been with me since I was a pup," Roman growled. "He wouldn't betray me." "There's more," Jax said. He pulled up a tablet. "We recovered a burner phone from one of the dead attackers in the ravine. There was one text message sent 5 minutes before the ambush." Roman took the tablet. The message was short. "Target is in the dead zone. The Omega will be the bait. Make sure there are no witnesses." Roman stared at the screen. "The Omega will be the bait?" He turned slowly to look at Ivy. Ivy felt the blood drain from her face. "Me?" "They knew I was there." "No," Roman said, his mind racing, putting the terrifying puzzle together. "Not you. They didn't know you specifically. They knew an Omega would be there." He grabbed Ivy's shoulders. "Ivy, think. Before you found us. Did you see anyone else? Did you smell anything strange?" "I told you about the wine," Ivy stammered. "But wait." She closed her eyes, thinking back to the snowstorm. 2 days before the storm hit. I was checking my snares. I saw a drone, a black drone. It was hovering over my cabin. I thought it was just kids playing. A drone. Roman swore. They were scouting for a drop zone. They needed a place remote enough to ambush us, but with a local scapegoat to blame if the bodies were found. They were going to frame me, Ivy realized, horror washing over her. If you had died, they would have found the bodies in my cabin. They would have said I poisoned you. A scentless Omega living in exile, Roman said darkly. The perfect patsy. No one would believe you didn't do it. They would have executed you before you could even speak. The realization hit them both at the same time. This wasn't just an assassination attempt. It was a coup. And the traitor wasn't a rogue in the woods. The traitor was here, inside the palace. Suddenly, the lights in the penthouse flickered and died. The electronic locks on the elevator disengaged with a heavy clank. "Get down!" Jack screamed, diving for his weapon. A red laser dot appeared on the center of Ivy's chest. Roman didn't think. He didn't shift. He just moved. He threw his body in front of Ivy, just as the glass of the balcony window shattered. Crack! The sound of a high-powered sniper rifle echoed through the room. Roman jerked back, a grunt of pain escaping his lips as he collapsed on top of Ivy, shielding her with his own weight as darkness swallowed the room. "Roman!" Ivy screamed, her hands instantly wet with warm, sticky blood. The king was down, and the hunt had followed them home. The penthouse was plunged into absolute darkness, save for the flickering red strobes of the emergency backup system. The smell of ozone and copper filled the air. "Roman!" Ivy screamed, her hands pressing desperately against the king's chest. "Quiet," Jax hissed, crawling over to them. He dragged a heavy overturned marble table to shield them from the shattered window. "The shooter is on the adjacent roof. He has thermal. We need to move." Roman groaned. The bullet had hit him high in the shoulder, near the clavicle. For a human, it would be survivable. For a wolf, it should have been a scratch. But the wound wasn't closing. The blood oozing between Ivy's fingers was black and frothy. "Silver nitrate," Roman gritted out, his teeth clenched against the burning agony. "Liquid core, it's poisoning the blood." "We can't move him," Ivy said, her voice shaking, but her hand steady. "If the silver reaches his heart, he dies. I have to get it out. Now." "Here?" Jax looked at the glass-strewn floor. "In the dark, with a sniper watching." "Do you have a better idea?" Ivy snapped. She ripped the hem of her tactical shirt. "Give me your knife." Jax hesitated, then handed her his combat blade. "Guard the door," Ivy commanded. "If they missed the first shot, the breach team is coming through the elevator any second." Jax nodded and vanished into the shadows near the foyer. Ivy turned back to Roman. His golden eyes were dimming, the pupils blown wide. He was the strongest creature on the continent, the Alpha King, and he was fading in her arms. "This is going to hurt," she whispered, leaning over him. "Do it," Roman wheezed. Ivy didn't let herself think. She didn't let herself feel the horror of cutting into living flesh. She became the girl in the cabin again, the one who dragged bodies through the snow. She used the tip of the knife to widen the wound. Roman threw his head back, a silent scream tearing at his throat, his body arching off the floor. I'm sorry," Ivy sobbed, digging deeper. The tip of the blade hit metal. She used 2 fingers, ignoring the slick blood, and pinched the deformed bullet. With a sickening squelch, she yanked it free and threw it across the room. Roman gasped, a massive intake of air. Almost instantly, the black veins around the wound began to recede. The steam of accelerated regeneration began to rise from his shoulder. But before he could move, the elevator doors chimed. Ding! They were forced open with a hydraulic spreader. 4 figures in tactical gear stormed into the penthouse. They weren't humans. Their movements were jerky, animalistic, rogue wolves. "Find the king!" the leader barked. "Finish the job! Jax opened fire from the kitchen island, taking down the point man. The room erupted in gunfire. "Stay down," Roman growled, trying to sit up, but the silver poison still lingered. His limbs were heavy. "They'll smell you," Ivy realized. "The blood. You're a beacon to them." She looked at the assassins. They were sniffing the air, tracking the scent of royal blood in the dark. But they couldn't smell her. For 23 years, her lack of scent had been her curse. It was why she was exiled, why she was unlovable, why she was a ghost. Now it was her weapon. "Stay here," Ivy whispered. She grabbed a heavy, jagged shard of glass from the broken window. She stood up. To the wolves, she was invisible, a scentless void in a room full of noise. She moved barefoot over the broken glass, feeling no pain. She flanked the squad, moving toward the sofa where Roman lay. The second assassin was creeping forward, his gun raised. He sniffed the air, tracking Roman's position. He never heard Ivy. She lunged from the shadows, driving the glass shard into the gap in his body armor, right between the neck and shoulder. He gurgled and dropped. The third assassin spun around. "What the? Who's there?" He couldn't lock on to a target. He fired blindly into the dark. Ivy was already moving. She grabbed a heavy bronze statue from a pedestal and swung it with all the hysterical strength of adrenaline. It connected with the assassin's helmet with a bone-shattering clang. He went down. The leader, the last one standing, realized something was wrong. "Show yourself!" he roared, his eyes shifting to glowing red. "I can't smell you. What are you?" "I'm the defect." Ivy's voice came from everywhere and nowhere. The leader panicked. He turned to spray bullets at the sound of her voice. But then a shadow rose behind him. A shadow that did have a scent. The scent of pine, ozone, and absolute, terrified rage. Roman Sterling had recovered. The king didn't use a weapon. He didn't shift. He simply reached out, grabbed the assassin by the back of his tactical vest, and threw him through the drywall of the hallway. Roman was at Ivy's side in a millisecond. He checked her for wounds, his hands frantic. "Did they touch you? Ivy, look at me." "I'm okay," she breathed, dropping the bloody glass shard. "I'm okay." Roman pulled her into his chest, burying his face in her neck. "You saved me. Again." "Sir," Jax called out, limping from the kitchen. "The leader, he's alive, and he's talking." The throne room. The next morning. The great hall of the Obsidian Palace was packed. The Council of 12, the leaders of the territories, sat in a semicircle. In the center stood Lady Eleanor and her father, Duke Thorn. They looked somber. They were dressed in black. "It is with a heavy heart," Duke Thorn announced, his voice booming, "that we must assume emergency command. The attack on the penthouse was catastrophic. We have had no word from the king. We must assume the worst." Elena dabbed at dry eyes with a lace handkerchief. Roman was reckless, bringing that stray into the palace. It was clearly a security breach. I only hope he didn't suffer. "So," Thorn continued, "by the laws of succession, as the highest-ranking noble." "You are sitting in my chair, Thorn," a voice thundered from the massive double doors. The doors groaned open. Roman Sterling walked in. He was wearing his full, ceremonial military dress, his medals gleaming. His shoulder was bandaged, but he walked with the power of a storm. Behind him walked Jax and the royal guard, dragging a bound, beaten prisoner, the leader of the assassination squad. And beside Roman, wearing a simple but elegant black dress, walked Ivy Vance. The color drained from Eleanor's face. Duke Thorn gripped the armrests of the throne he had prematurely occupied. "Roman," Thorn stammered, "we thought you were dead. We were just maintaining order." "Is that what you call it?" Roman stopped at the foot of the dais. He gestured to Jax. Jax threw the prisoner forward. "Tell them." The assassin spat blood on the marble floor. He looked at Duke Thorn. He paid us 5 million in crypto, and her. He nodded at Eleanor. She gave us the access codes. She told us to aim for the Omega first, to make the king watch. A collective gasp went through the council. Lies! Elena shrieked, her composure shattering. This is a setup. That girl, that scentless freak, she brainwashed him. Roman turned to Elena. The look on his face was so cold it could have frozen the sun. That freak, Roman said softly, is the only reason I am breathing. She walked through a room of armed killers who couldn't sense her, and she dismantled them to save her mate. He turned to the council. For centuries we have treated Omegas as the lowest rank. We exiled those without scent. We called them weak. He took Ivy's hand and raised it. We were wrong. In a war against enemies who track by smell, the scentless are not weak. They are the ultimate weapon. They are the ghosts of our kind. And Ivy Vance is the first of a new royal guard. Roman turned back to Thorn and Eleanor. Duke Thorn, Lady Eleanor, you are charged with high treason. You can't prove anything, Thorn yelled, standing up. I demand a trial by combat. Granted, Roman said instantly. He didn't wait. He didn't shift. He simply walked up the stairs. Thorn tried to draw a concealed pistol, but Roman was faster. He disarmed the Duke and threw him off the dais. Thorn hit the floor and didn't move. Elena fell to her knees, sobbing. Roman, please. I did it for us. I was supposed to be your queen. A queen protects the pack, Roman said, looking down at her. You only protected yourself. Guards rushed in, seizing Eleanor and dragging her screaming from the hall. Roman sat on the throne. He looked tired, but unbreakable. He looked at Ivy, who was standing alone in the center of the room, looking unsure of her place. Ivy, he called out. Come here. Ivy walked up the steps. She stopped beside the throne. Roman shook his head. He pointed to the armrest of his throne. Not beside. With. He pulled her down until she was sitting on his lap, effectively sharing the throne of the Western Consortium. Let it be known, Roman announced to the stunned room, his voice ringing with the power of the Alpha Command. From this day forward, the ban on scentless wolves is lifted. Any wolf exiled for this trait is to be recalled and trained. And Ivy Vance, he looked at her, his golden eyes soft and full of a promise that would last a lifetime. Ivy Vance is my mate. She is the Ghost Queen, and anyone who disrespects her answers to the moon. Ivy looked out at the sea of bowing wolves. She touched the healing bandage on Roman's shoulder. She wasn't cold anymore. She wasn't hungry. And for the first time in her life, she wasn't invisible. She was home. And that, my friends, is the incredible story of Ivy Vance and Roman Sterling. It just goes to show that sometimes the very thing the world tells you is your biggest weakness, like being a scentless Omega, can turn out to be your greatest superpower. Ivy went from freezing in a cabin to sitting on the throne, not because she changed who she was, but because she found the one person who appreciated her true value. What did you think of that ending? Did you suspect Lady Eleanor was the mastermind behind the ambush? And what do you think about the idea of a ghost guard of scentless wolves? If you enjoyed this story, please smash that like button. It really helps the channel grow. Don't forget to subscribe and hit the notification bell so you never miss a new episode of our romance sagas. Share this video with a friend who loves a good underdog story. Thanks for watching, and I'll see you in the next one.